is coming from Reddit. It was submitted 1 day ago exactly by user Forever Dead 3. And the title of this story is Late Night Armed Encounter with the Ghost Train on the DC Metro. Here we go. While I can't give hard proof of what happened to me due to it happening 8 years ago, this story actually is true. Many of you will not understand why I have been so hung up on this experience of mine for 8 years. But when you live in a city like Washington, D.C., that has upwards of 3 bomb threats a day, you will learn to be cautious of everything you see. This hyperinsensitivity is pretty much instilled in you from an early age with the whole see something, say something, and other such campaigns. With this background on why I have remained hung up on this incident, there is what happened that night on the Metro. I live in the Washington, D.C. area and have often used the Metro to get around. One night, when I was about 10, my dad and I decided to take the Metro to go to a Washington Capitals game. The night went well. Don't remember if they won or not. And for some reason, we stayed around a while longer after the game instead of just taking the Metro home. I think the reason for this was we went to dinner somewhere in Chinatown. Once we did finally decide to go home and got to the Metro platform, there was literally only one other person there waiting for the train. Now this is where weird meet. Now this is where weird. I'm sorry. Now this is weird and its own, as the Chinatown Gallery PlayStation is most likely the busiest of them all, and 3 of the busiest metro lines meet on this one station. At the time, I didn't think much of it and just passed it off since it was very late that night. Which honestly most likely was the reason for this. The truly freaky part is when the train arrived. The train estimated arrival time was reading 22 minutes. Don't know why, but I remember that number specifically. And my dad and I got a bit upset as it was already really late and we just wanted to get home. This number though is really weird, as trains come on average about 10 minutes apart and 15 at the most. But we were mostly just upset about having to wait instead of dwelling on it. About 10 minutes into waiting, a train suddenly came out of the tunnel. This train was the standard Metro train, but it most certainly was not a normal one, as every light on it was off, including the front headlights, and the sign still read around 11 minutes until the next train. Despite these facts, the train still came to a stop at the platform. My dad and I not really thinking about how weird it was that the lights were all out and how it arrived unannounced, still moved forward toward the opening doors, just wanting to get home. Next thing we knew, a guy emerged from the darkened train and blocked the entrance. This halted us in our tracks, not only because it was unexpected, but also because the man was holding an M16 or M4. Couldn't be able to tell you which because I was so young when it happened. The This man was not dressed up in anything fancy and just looked like any other guy except for the assault rifle, of course. All the man said to us was something along the lines of, "Trains closed," or "Trains not in service." But being young and very scared, I don't remember exactly what he said. I do remember looking down in both directions and seeing men with either an AK-47 or M16 or M4 blocking every single one of the doors in both directions. I also tried to look into the train to see how many more of them there were, but couldn't because of how truly dark the train was. I also remember seeing the other men further down on the platform, looking scared out of his mind. My dad quickly grabbed me by the arm and pulled me back from the train. I could not take my eyes off the guy who stopped us, especially not after seeing how many of them there were and having my mind running wild by what else could be on the train. The man himself could not take his eyes off of my dad, and I could feel many of the other men blocking the doors staring our way too. Just as quickly as it happened, though, it ended. After about the average time, doors are open to allow people to get on and off the train, off the man, and off. The man, along with the others blocking the doors, retreated back into the shadows with the doors closing behind them. The train quickly took off, never turning on its headlights, nor hitting the horn to alert anyone in the tunnel that there was a train coming. I looked at my dad and asked him what that was all about, and with a look of slight fear and general startledness in a deer in headlights, he told me he had no idea. I glanced down at the other man, and he was looking right at us as if to ask the same question I just asked. He too had the same look in his eyes as my dad. We waited in silence, just staring towards the next 10 or however many minutes until the lights on the ground started flashing to alert us to an approaching train. The train announced its arrival with its horn and was a completely normal metro train. My dad and I cautiously entered the train. I noticed the other man doing the same, only he had moved further up the platform, so he was on the same car as us. Only at the other end, and I guess he just felt safer being near someone else after what happened. This train was completely abandoned, except for the other guy, which also was weird as not only is the train station we are at one of the most crowded, but the next one is another very busy one, where the last two lines connect to this one. The whole train ride was in silence, just trying to make sense of what just happened. When we exited the train a good time later at Grosvenor or Strathmore, the other man was still there. He gave us a scared look of, "Don't leave me alone." But I don't think my dad noticed it as he did not look back. This experience made me use the metro less late at night, and my dad and I did not go to another Capitals game for at least a year. My dad and I have often talked to each other about what we saw, though, and always refer to it as the ghost train, as that is exactly what it looked like. I have never again experienced anything like this on the metro, nor did I read about it in the newspaper. I have literally lost sleep trying to figure out online what this was. I seriously want to say that this was just the Secret Service, and it was some senator or the VP or maybe even the president. But it wasn't. I know what the Secret Service looks like. I go to a private school, played tennis against us a few times. The Secret Service, while they are often plain clothes, have a wire hanging out of their ear, just like in the movies. And I have never personally witnessed them openly carrying assault weapons, except for in front of the White House a couple of times. Even when I have witnessed them openly carrying it, it is often some variant of a submachine gun, such as a P90 or a shotgun. But I have never actually seen them holding an assault rifle. The guys on this train fit none of this description except the plain clothes part. I honestly have no idea what I witnessed that night. I am still trying to make sense of it over 8 years later. All quotations in this paragraph may not be exactly 100% accurate as to what was said that night. But I was 10 years old and scared out of my mind. I will say, though, that the conversations did follow the same pattern, pretty much, and the descriptions are mostly accurate. Following this night, there was a follow-up incident that sticks in my mind as just as vividly, if not more, as that night on the metro. About 2 weeks following this incident, I remember a couple of men arriving at our house. I'm not going to say what they were. Unpopular. But having a couple of random men arriving at your house was pretty unheard of. I believe I was actually just sitting in my room playing Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 when my parents called me from downstairs. Once I got about halfway down the stairs, I could clearly see both my parents and the two men standing side by side in our doorway. I got a good look at the two men as I slowly descended down the rest of the stairs. They both were wearing the same thing, a black suit with a black hat. Both of the men were also bald and had the exact same all serious look on their faces. In fact, the look on their faces were so similar that I would not have been surprised if they were brothers. But there was a slight couple of differences between the two, including one being slightly taller. Granted, I was 10, so everyone was just bigger than me, and I couldn't really tell heights. Once I got by observing their first appearance, I began to wonder why they were there. This question was soon answered, as one of the men said to me, "We need to ask you and your father some questions." The second man immediately, as if they had practiced this beforehand, followed this up with, "We understand you had an unusual incident 13 and a half days ago." As soon as he said this, the same look of fear and surprise that was on my father's face 2 weeks before was there again. My mother, on the other hand, had a generally confused and worried look on her face, as we had not fully explained to her what had happened that night. In this same instance, when I took notice of my parents' reactions, I realized that neither of my two cats nor my two dogs were anywhere I could see, and the dogs were always happy to run up and bark at and jump all over new people at our door. Today, however, these dogs were nowhere in sight. We may have had something weird happen a bit ago. "Why are you asking?" my dad asked the two men. "We would prefer to discuss that in private," the first man responded. "Well, we can all discuss this in the dining room," says my dad. "I'll talk with you in there," the first man responds, and then proceeds to turn to his partner and directs him. "You discuss with him," referring to let some strange man be alone in your young son's room, right? The men also began to become more questioning of us now that my mother was lashing out and asked where my sister was, who is just a couple of years older than I am, was. To be honest, I don't remember where exactly she was. But my best guess was that she was out horseback riding at her barn in Poolsville. After telling the men this is where she was, they began to ease off that subject, but were still concerned with how my mother was acting. My father, however, stepped in and calmed my mom down, while the men made subsequent comments about not wanting to subdue her or such. As I proceeded upstairs back to my room, I heard the sound of the man following me all the way up the stairs and into my room. The man proceeded to close the door as I sat on my chair and said to me, "I need to ask you some important questions about the night 13 and a half days ago." He then noticed the paused game of Roller Coaster Tycoon on my computer screen in front of my chair and told me, "You can go back to playing that while we talk if it makes you more comfortable." I hesitantly turned back to my game while saying in my most convincing voice, "I honestly don't even know what you are talking about." "Come on now." He said my name here, which is, I have to admit it, which I have omitted to keep my identity secret. "I know you know the incident I'm talking about that happened 13 and a half days ago. You know, the one with the metro train." My heart stopped for an instant, and my mind began to race with so many different questions. How does this complete stranger know my name? Who is this guy? If I must tell him all I know, will he leave? If I admit to being there at that incident, will there be punishments? You know, the usual little kid worry stuff of wanting to just stay out of trouble. At this point, I had completely lost focus from my game. No longer did I care that Ride 7 had broken down and that my pork was rapidly losing its approval rating. Instead, I just wanted to be done with this whole thing. I believe I broke out into tears as I began to spout off every last thing I remembered about that night, right down to the fact that I had never told anyone about that night before this encounter, and that my dad and I barely talked about it. After I said this, the man immediately thanked me for my cooperation. He proceeded to leave the room with me just sitting at my desk, still in tears. After the sounds of excited screams and notifications coming from the still ongoing game of Roller Coaster Tycoon playing in the background, my mother suddenly rushed into my room to try and comfort me as the sound of the man calmly walking down our stairs could be heard. She asked me on the normal mom things of, "Did he hurt you? And what did he say?" But she then gave up on that and just tried to go back to comfort me and get me to stop crying. I soon heard another 2 pairs of footsteps downstairs come from our dining room and approach our front door. I could hear the cloud of my dad being a polite host by opening the door for the 2 men and saying goodbye as they left, right before he immediately ran upstairs to us. He would never tell me about what the men asked or told him, and does not talk about this incident much. We do still talk about the ghost train, but whenever I try to transition to the men that came after, he always gets very abrasive and stops wanting to talk in general. This is honestly the first time I'm officially publishing my story. The only people that have heard even about this encounter before are my immediate family and a very few close friends. Beyond that, I have honestly been too scared to ever tell people about this experience. Whether this is because of fear, people will pass me off as a crazy person, trying to convince them of a wild tale, or because I fear punishment or speaking out. This all changes now as I really need to bring closure as to what I experienced. If anyone else has experienced something like this, or even knows what this was about, please do direct message me because I really need to stop wondering what actually was going on and happened on that night so many years ago. Edit. Fixed spacing issue. Edit 2. As an add-on, one of the major things about this incident all these years is why did they stop? It is not uncommon to see a blacked out, not in service metro car pass by a station late at night. Why did they feel the need to stop at this station instead of just keep going down the track without making a scene? Edit 3. For those that say it was just the money train, here is my best answer to that from what I have already posted in the comments. I definitely think that the train cars that pulled up were the ones used by the money trains. Just don't think that they were being used for that use that night. I don't see them loading carts into it, and they definitely did not want people knowing what they were there, that they were there. Really want to tell myself that I just saw the money train, but I just know it wasn't as simple as that. Trust me, I really just want to be able to write it off as the money train, but the money train is usually completely obvious. Plus, it's simply being the money train does not explain the men coming and questioning us after. There you have it. That story was posted by Forever Dead 3 on Reddit under the subreddit No Sleep. Now, what do I think? What I think does not matter. What does matter is what Forever Dead 3 thinks. When he was 10, this occurred. And this was 8 years ago. So that means he's 18 now. 10 years ago was 2006. And it is now 2000. The point is, user Forever Dead 3 had a definite experience, one that he can't ignore, one that plagues him to this day. I have my own experience. When I was approximately 5 years old, I was in my grandmother's room. Don't ask me why I was playing in my grandmother's room. I'm a kid. I remember there was a kerfuffle going next door in the neighbor's yard. So I turned off the lights. And I went over to the window. And I got down on my knees so that my hands and my head were on the windowsill. And as I watched, there were 2 men standing outside. And one of them had something leveled at the other man. The other man backed up with his hands up into the shadows. And the man that clearly had a gun was pointedly asking the other man questions. And I suppose he didn't get the answer that he wanted, because I remember not hearing the gunshots ring out. I remember seeing the flashes of lights preceding the bullets coming out of the gun. And I remember our next door neighbor rushing outside, and he was pleading with the man with the "what did you do?" type of questioning. And he took the gun from him, and he ran inside, and the other man ran inside, and they argued some more. And then the one man came running back outside, and another man came running outside behind him. And they picked up the man, and they disappeared into the shadows of the backyard. Now, this happened in South Carolina. This happened back in the early 80s. It happened at night. And while I was there watching this, I remember my mother and my grandmother came into the room, and they turned on the lights. But then my mother rushed and she turned the lights back off, and she picked me up, stood me to my feet, and backed me away from the door. And she and my grandmother stood beside the two windows in my grandmother's room, and they looked outside the windows, trying to see what was going on. Clearly, they heard the gunshots. Well, as far as I know, that man was murdered that night, and they took him out into a secluded part of the woods in the back, and they buried his body in a shallow grave. To my knowledge, my neighbor never went to prison for that. To my knowledge, the man that did the murdering, who to this day I would not recognize if he was standing in front of me. To my knowledge, he never went to jail for what happened. Nor did the person that helped him bury the body. I don't know if justice was ever served for the dead man. What I do know is I witnessed a murder, a flat out murder. And because I was so young, I don't think I really fully understood what happened. I am 40 years old now, and it was only a few years ago that I was giving it thought, that it came to mind. In fact, it came to my mind while I was living in Mississippi, and my eyes went wide, and I realized that I had witnessed a murder. I had witnessed a soul departing from this earth. I had witnessed a life being snuffed out. As many of you know, if you watched any of my videos or any of the videos related to this, I served in the United States Marine Corps. I served during a time of peace. So I never had to fulfill that part of my contract that required me to take a life. And was so certain that I would want to burden, even though I've been trained to do just that. I hope the day never comes that I have to take a life. But should that day do arrive, and me taking a life is in the defense of my own life, or in the defense of the lives of innocence, or the lives of someone that I love, I can only hope I am able to do what is necessary. But I hope it never comes to that, ever. I worked with a man who was in investigations. I was a security, well, I am a security officer, and we were both armed officers. And this was basically a job that he had that was kind of like a holding pattern until he can get on with a better outfit. And then he would move to whatever outfit he did later on. But I talked with him and I asked him a question. And I told him that experience that I just shared with you. And I was like, what do you think I should do about that? And he said, you should report it to the police of that city and of that particular town, because the little bit of information that you know could potentially lead to the closing of a case. And the only reason I didn't take his advice is because I was a child when that happened. I was a very young child. I wasn't even 6 yet. The only person that I recognized from this little ordeal was my grandmother's neighbor, and he died about 2 or 3 years ago. And as far as the other people involved with this murder, I don't know who they are. I couldn't point out the man that pulled the trigger. I couldn't point out the man that helped take him in back to bury the other guy. I have no idea who these people are. None. I'm afraid that there isn't anything I can offer the police that could help this case, be it closed or opened. I'm sorry. In fact, the more I think about the situation, the details kind of change in my mind. So I can't trust my mind to remember everything exactly the way it happened 100%. But what I've told you is what I've remembered. And I really don't know why I'm telling you guys this. But that man that was murdered, I hope that his family found peace in his death, if he was ever found, and solace in his passing. I hope that the man that pulled the trigger and the men that helped found some sort of peace from the crime that was committed, and forgiveness for their part in the crime. But it's kind of a tough situation. It's just a tough situation all around. I'm sorry, I don't take requests, guys. Taking requests kind of constricts me, and I don't want to feel constricted when I make a video like now. I knew that I was ready to film again. I just wasn't ready to film again. I just had to make myself do it. I've been kinda following the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is I come home, I eat, and then I game for a couple of hours, and then I go to bed. Well, I came home and immediately decided I don't care, I'm filming something. And I read the story on Reddit earlier, and I decided, why not? So, oh, and yes, I have worked up the courage to read more ghost stories, so I will be reading some more scary Reddit stories. So, stay tuned. Thank you for watching. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys so much.